Welcome to The Craft. I'm your host, May Globus. This podcast is a collection of intimate conversations on artistry, mastery, and life with talented, passionately curious creatives and entrepreneurs. Most are dear friends, some are those I've admired from afar. I hope you enjoy these conversations, this exploration of the humanity that connects all of us, as much as I do having them. Thank you for being here and for listening. This episode is sponsored by Happy Fox Health, a natural supplement brand focused on sea moss, a marine algae that has 92 out of 102 essential nutrients that your body needs to thrive and regenerate. I've used a number of their products and found it's really given me clarity of mind. Visit happyfoxhealth.com and use promo code THECRAFT for an exclusive 15 to 20% discount off your first product purchase. As a number of you know, I'm also a certified sound therapy practitioner and founder of Oto Healing, a sound therapy studio and practice. Sound has been a healing modality through many cultures for thousands of years. Oto's approach to sound is rooted in both art and science, the art being the history of sound, the science being quantum physics, biology, brainwave states, and more. All listeners of the show get 15% off their first private 1-hour session. Visit otohealing.com to book yours now. Justin Tisdall has been many things in his life. A competitive athlete, a lyricist and musician, and a veteran of the restaurant industry. He made his way from serving cocktails at Feenie's and doing fine dining service at Lumiere to working at Boneta, Market by Jean-Georges at the Shangrila, running house at Chambar, and finally starting his own establishment. He was born and raised in Toronto, adopted by a Caucasian family. Though his parents were supportive of all he did, it wasn't always easy growing up biracial in a white neighborhood. Curious about his birth parents, when he was of age, he began searching for his biological family, and he found them. Justin was quiet as a kid, both bookish and naturally athletic. He excelled at a number of sports before focusing on swimming. It brought him to Vancouver at 16 years old and led him to being on UBC swim team and competing nationally. There wasn't much funding for athletes at the time, so restaurant jobs were the only ones that fit his schedule. Injuries eventually led to his retirement from the sport in 2005, and restaurants truly became his calling. In this conversation, we talk about the environment he grew up in and his close relationship with his adoptive father, the incredible story of finding his birth family, his long career in the restaurant industry and how he leads his team, the way key roles in establishments contribute to the overall feeling of a restaurant, what he learned as a competitive athlete, and how he applies that to his current work, Justin's time as a musician and what performing gave him, what he wants to say to his teammates and friends from his swimming years, advice he'd give to those who are also adopted, and much more. Please enjoy this deeply reflective conversation with the humble, intelligent, self-aware, and truly wonderful Justin Tisdall. Justin Tisdall.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm great. Welcome to The Craft.
Thank you for having me on.
So it's really funny when you texted me this morning to tell me that you were here. Did you see the text that was above it from 2009?
I did not look at it.
It was a text of you saying, hey, I'm playing a show tonight. Doors open at blah, blah.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, that's amazing. That was his music chapter.
Yep.
I love it. I hope I made it out to it.
I would try to do a show every month, and that was probably for that's easily 4 years.
Yeah. Okay.
So hopefully you made it out.
Yeah.
We always try to just throw good parties rather than have a show.
And I do remember that you and the swimmers used to have that house on Dunbar.
We did. I was never a member of that house,
Yeah.
but probably the guy on the couch there a lot. That Dunbar house has been quoted by the police as having the biggest house party they've ever seen. And that was a good party.
Yeah, I think I was there.
Yeah.
I think it was really, really good.
Yeah.
So for listeners, Justin and I actually go back way back to university.
Yeah.
And my fondest memory, and I was saying this to you yesterday, or the one that sticks out in my mind so much is we shared English classes together.
Yep.
And I would show up and you would be there and I would sit beside you and you would be writing hip hop lyrics and song lyrics.
Yeah, I think and this was even before I was making music. I think I just really wanted to get stuff out and maybe unlock some things going and spinning around inside my head.
Yeah, just to like express it and get it out.
Yeah, and also I find, I think growing up in, the 80s and 90s, golden era of hip hop, that was just like, that hit me pretty hard from where I was kind of from and born. And that really spoke to me. And I feel like a really good music is a mathematical puzzle. And to try to understand that and unlock it emotionally, because they're still saying things that are real, I found that as an interesting challenge. Like, I really liked that.
Tell me more about you see it as a mathematical challenge. I'm so interested in what you mean by that.
So if I'm not in music theory at all. I haven't been educated in music at all. I just really enjoy it. And, you only have so many bars. In each bar, you can fit so many notes. And the way you want to arrange those notes is completely unique to other people, right? Or if you're original, you're unique to yourself, right? So to hear people do that really well is, it's just like Shakespeare. Like you might be listening to Wu-Tang and Riz is talking about, chemical equations, and you're like, this is more complex than anything I read in English 101. This is deep, especially from someone coming from probably an educational system where they didn't learn all this. They taught it to themselves. So to figure these things out and kind of unlock it was an interesting rabbit hole and pathway for me. I was really quiet, and I really enjoyed listening to things I loved. All types of music, not just hip hop.
Did you have a favorite golden era
Favorite
artist? Yeah.
Group. I've got two best friends in my life that we all grew up together since we were 6, and we have a debate between best versus favorite. Does the best have to be your favorite?
Oh, interesting. Okay, that's
so
another level.
The best album is probably Illmatic. I think some people would argue, but it's always usually in the top 3. But I was always a Jay-Z fan. Before he was Jay-Z, we know now. Before he was with Beyonce. And I felt Nas was very complex in how he wrote. And you could tell he wrote things. But Jay-Z had stories that you could feel. You could like feel them inside you. And like those two things combined were amazing to me. But understanding why they were so different also hit me differently.
Okay. Yeah, no, I can, now that I'm thinking about it, you're just like, there are these stories and it makes you feel something. Yeah. And upon reflection, it does feel like he's a storyteller.
I think,
and it's just the way he delivers it too.
Yeah. And I honestly feel he'd be a storyteller if he weren't in music. Right. And, through, whatever he's doing with fashion, whatever he's doing with sports, I just think people are here for certain reasons, and no matter the vessel and how you express it, it's still your purpose.
I like that. Well, I'd love to go back. Speaking of stories,
yeah,
let's
sure.
go into your backstory.
Sure.
So you were born and raised in Toronto.
Yeah. And
you were adopted.
I was.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
I was adopted a few months after being born. Into a Caucasian family. My parents were incredible. My mom was adopted when she was young. And so they could have children, but they felt they wanted to give back. So they adopted my brother, who is Caucasian, looks like my parents. And then a few years later, I guess they adopted me, which I think is a bit of a interesting time, like 1981, to adopt a biracial kid into a white family, predominantly white area. And so my parents have always been super open about adoption and kind of understanding it. And I remember I'd always just ask, like, before I knew we were different, or I was different than most families, once I knew that, I'd always be like, why this? Like, why almost put yourselves through some things that you didn't have to? And they just said, we loved you. As soon as we heard that you were coming, we loved you. So that's all that mattered. And I think that's probably been a thread throughout my whole life. Yeah.
And tell me more about your experience being, a biracial kid in a predominantly white neighborhood, and how that shaped you then, and how it has led you to how you are now?
I would say, I grew up, as I said, excellent parents. My childhood was pretty great, peppered with, some pretty harsh incidents of, racism that pop up. So where I grew up, you could see at my elementary school that there was the right and the wrong side of the tracks. So I was fortunate to be on the right side of the tracks, knowing that I could have easily been on the wrong side or not even born at all. And like the kids that I grew up with that were from the other side, their parents each had two jobs. Like each parent had two jobs. The kids were kind of raising themselves. Some of them, got into some bad things and, had some hardships later in life, even though they were great kids when we were young. And I would look at that and I would know, I don't know why, but from a very young age, I knew I was really lucky. And the other kids that I would see that looked like me would be foster kids. So I'd know them for a little bit and then they'd be gone. And I remember I'd like cry myself to sleep as a kid because when I was like 3, 4, 5, I didn't understand the difference between adoption and foster, especially when it's like white families taking a black kid and the black kid goes. And I never wanted to leave. So once I started to understand adoption, I was like, oh, I'm not going to leave. So I think that kept me really quiet for a lot of years. But I think that made me internally confident and not like cocky, but because I was so quiet, it really helped me understand myself. And that's definitely projected throughout my, the last 40 years.
So introspective as a kid,
Very.
introverted.
Yeah.
But I always do feel, I was the same way. I was an introvert as a child. I'm an introvert.
Yeah.
I manifest as an extrovert.
I would say
quite
the
a
same.
lot.
An introverted extrovert.
Yeah, ambivert, I think they call it.
Yeah.
But I do feel that being quiet and shy as a kid in reflection was totally fine because I observed the world a lot.
Right.
I watched a lot of things, the world go by, how people interacted,
Yeah.
human dynamics. And I appreciate that about being quiet.
Yeah, I think, my job now is one where I have to be a bit more out there and put myself in positions to kind of be a face of the company, to, team dynamics, just bring people together. But I was like, quick story my mom would probably tell everyone is like, when I was really young, I wouldn't talk to adults, any adult other than like my parents and maybe like my aunt or uncle, right? And so they thought I had like a learning disability. And they put me through all these tests and realized like, oh, he's actually the opposite. Like he should be doing some harder stuff. And it was just because I was quiet. And so even from that, I'm like, you're just judging someone. It wasn't like I was doing poorly in school at the time. I was just quiet. So you're learning all these things and watching people react around you, and you can kind of just be centered. And I think that's very much how I live my life now, too.
And tell me about your parents. I'd love to know more about them.
My parents are excellent. My mom is the person in any restaurant that every table will start talking to. She'll find a table next to them and just strike up a conversation. They're best friends by the end of the night. My dad has definitely been the biggest influence on my life. The whole nature nurture thing, since I was a kid being adopted, people are like, you're just like your dad. Like it is nurture the whole way. But my dad was incredibly intelligent, like top 1 percentile on earth at the time. And what happened was when he was a kid, he got really sick. And so instead of playing sports, he just studied and studied and studied. And he's now in the Order of Canada and he runs companies and he's done some pretty great things and left some big shoes to fill. But he never made it my mission to follow him. He was always like, I want you to do what you love. I want you to do sports. I want you to do education, but do whatever you're happy to do. So I always had incredible supporters. I could be working at the worst restaurant in Vancouver and they'd be like, these are the best wings I've ever had, or whatever it is. They'd always find some way to support. Like they'd come to hip hop shows. and they've always, but my dad's also more like a mentor as well. Like he's helped me with business plans. He will talk to me about any question I have anytime we are looking at different projects or come to some crossroads. Both my business partner and I will like have a meeting with my dad and try to figure it out. And so he's very much like a friend. I like at this age now we can be friends. When you're like teenagers, you know what it is. You know how it is. But he's very much probably the most influential thing on my life aside from music. And now my kids, I guess, and wife.
Right. Yeah.
But
Yeah. He sounds so supportive, and it's a huge thing to have unconditionally supportive parents when you're young, like ones that say, do what you want to do, because I wouldn't say that my experience was exactly the same way. There was a path that, my mom wanted me to take, but
Did you take that path?
No, I'm
Right.
naturally rebellious in certain ways. And I just kind of followed my curiosities and my heart, but I think she's come around to it now.
Yeah, as long as you're happy.
Fine with it. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious to know, did you want to meet your parents, your biological, sorry.
Here we go. This is where it gets real, but I always wanted to know, because when I was young, you're 3, 4, 5, you don't really know any different. And then people start telling you that you're different, right? Like you're different than most families. You don't look like your family. Literally, you're the black swan of the family. You also know that like my grandparents would be snowbirds. So in Toronto, they fly to Florida for their winters, and we'd drive down and visit them at like March break. And I remember more times than not, my brother would be with me. We'd be like, you stop, you run around a mall while you're driving just to like stretch your legs. And both white and black people would always be like, what are you? Not who are you or what's your background. It would always be, what are you? And it was such a weird question, because it's dehumanizing on a lot of levels, but it's also like, I'm 4. Like, I don't know. Right? Like, I don't know why you even asking me this question. Why are you stopping some random kid in a mall? So I always had a curiosity to know. My curiosity mostly was to say thank you, because I knew I've had more opportunities than I probably would have had with like a teenage mom. Right. And my parents were very open to helping me find them. My mom had no desire to find her family, but she's like, whatever you need, we're here to help, which is also very like nice and allows me to like step forward without having to walk on eggshells with them. So flash forward, 35 years, opening my first restaurant, opening night, I get an interesting phone call. Someone's asking me questions that only like 3 or 4 people on the planet would know. And then this lady's like, hey, I'm just letting you know that your dad's dead, but you have twin sisters looking for you.
Wow.
And then I walked into service. Like the first night of Juke's opening, that's what happened. So that was, threw me for a bit of a loop, but I found out I have half sisters who are twin sisters. About a couple months later, my wife and I flew to Toronto. We met them, got to meet my birth grandfather. He was to pass shortly thereafter, but I think that was probably one of the biggest moments in his life. Like he was like, I've been looking for you since the day you were born. So I got that chance. I didn't get the chance to meet my birth father, but the sisters are now my sisters. We are very close. And the mom that was the only information I had growing up, was that her date of birth and her maiden name, right? Assuming she got married years later. So I started looking for her when I was, I think, 18, when you were legally allowed to try, because my brother's birth family found him. They have a relationship, and so he kind of gave me some materials on how to move forward. But every time I'd start looking, and then, I met my girlfriend, who's now my wife. She'd help me start looking. We'd always just get butted up against something. Like you couldn't get past certain things, so we had no idea. But I met the sisters, went to their house, and they're like, this is your mom. And at the time, my wife and I were just like, we think this is her. And there's like a picture, and she's at a birthday party at like 18, and we're holding this picture of her, hopefully as an adult. And I was like, oh yeah, like that's definitely her. Like, put them together. And I was like, oh, and she's 3 months pregnant with me. So pandemic hits, world kind of stops. My wife and I had always chatted about it. And I was like, look, I just want to thank this lady, but I do not want to blow up her life. Like, I don't know what she's doing, what's going on. So I don't feel comfortable calling her. And my wife and I agreed that sometimes she might just call. My wife might call out of the blue just to say thank you. And during the pandemic, she did. We've had a few chats, and so I've got to say thank you. And both sides, like the birth mom, birth father side, both have agreed, like, yeah, your life would have been a lot different. So I do my best not to waste it.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
That's an incredible story, and I'm really happy that you got to say thank you.
Yeah, me too.
And yeah, meet your sisters, and you get to have a relationship with them.
Yeah.
It's so interesting how you were saying that your mom had no interest in finding your family. I've actually never met my biological father, and I have never had too much of an interest in pursuing meeting him.
Yep.
And it's just a feeling, you know.
But you
where
know,
I'm like,
like, it's a feeling.
I know. I'm like, I think I'm good. Like, I'm glad that I'm here, but I just don't. Yeah. And I've come to realize that that's okay too.
Yeah. And I think my brother's incredibly happy he's met his family, but he also didn't necessarily have the drive to find it like I did. And I think my drive is just because I'm like, I'd love to see someone that kind of looks like me, right? Like, I don't know what that feeling's like. And I'd love to just honestly say thank you for probably making a really hard decision for you, but the best decision for me. Right. And, the day I met my sisters and we walked from like the hotel to my grandfather's in the hospital at the time was like the first time I walked down the street and people would look at us like, oh, you look alike. Or like, oh, you're a family. And I'm like, I'd never had that feeling ever.
Wow.
And it was very surreal.
Wow. Thank you. Yeah, it's a privilege to hear that story. It's something that I didn't know about you. Yeah, when I met you all those years ago. And I'd love to go back to you as a kid and a teen.
Yeah.
And I know that you said that you were super duper athletic and super competitive and quite good at a lot of different sports. And then you picked a lane.
Yeah.
So I'd love to explore your sports chapter.
Yeah. We were always outdoors as kids. We lived on a cul-de-sac. We had, on our street in our neighborhood, there was older kids, so we're always playing sports. And it just happened that I think I was intuitive to it. Whatever the sport was, I could kind of pick it up pretty decently. And being quiet, that was kind of the only place I felt really like confident. And I remember I was probably like 10 or 11, and my neighbors, like all the adults, the dads, would go and play basketball on like Tuesday nights, and they're like, in their 30s, and I'd be like a 12-year-old playing with like grown men. And that's the only time I felt comfortable. As soon as I'd stop off the basketball court, I would be quiet again and like shy and reserved. So I think the competition was always with myself. It was like, how can I be better? How can I do better? If I happen to win, great. But once I moved into only swimming, some of my best races I didn't win. They were incredible races to me. Like, I might have been third. I might have not even got a medal. But I think the drive was always internally. And I found anytime it was an external goal or drive, it was vapid. Like, it didn't exist. Like, you wouldn't perform well. And I remember being young, I was on a swim team, and there's a kid who would, he was my age. We'd always race each other. And if he had a good race, his dad would buy him something. And I remember saying to my dad after a race, I'm like, he always gets something. How come you never buy me anything? And my dad was like, you should just want to do it for you. And if you don't want to do it for you, you shouldn't be doing it. And that lesson, I might have been 8 at the time, 9, but that lesson is a lesson I'll be teaching my kids. I'll be teaching anybody. It's like external rewards seldom gratify you.
It's very, very true.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know this wanting to be better and the best at what you do. Where do you think that stems from?
I think probably adoption, whatever goes through your head as a kid, and if you're not good enough or people have said things to you, or, you get in fights about things you can't change, right? It pushes you probably further to be quiet, but it also pushes you to really examine yourself and not let people beat you or break you. And so I think that I'm pretty probably strong-willed, but it's also I'm just as hard on myself.
Yeah. But I feel like you've accomplished so much in your life if you sort of like look back at it. And I think it's amazing. I mean, what you've done in the restaurant industry and the businesses that you've started, your competitive swim career, your music. It's a lot and it's varied.
It's varied. I think there's a common theme between it all of like challenging. Again, a lot of it's fortunate. Like, I'm fortunate that I could represent our country. I'm fortunate that I can open a business in Chinatown and, we feed the community down there and do a lot of charitable work. But I think all of it was the same thing. Like swimming every day, you're just trying to get, a few millimeters better, a few millimeters faster. And you have to do it from within yourself because no one's going to do it for you, right? Mm-hmm. You do it as a team because you're training together, but if you don't put in the effort, you'll never be better. Mm-hmm. And I think with music, that's the same thing. Like I say I learned more making a few music albums about literature and writing and reading and understanding and pacing and patience than 4 years of university. And restaurants are similar. The cool thing about restaurants is every day is something new. Every day is a new challenge, even though it's the same room, the same seats, similar staff.
Yeah.
But it's all, I think what I'm looking for is always trying to challenge myself. Yeah.
I was thinking about after our call yesterday when we were catching up, and you were saying that, you eventually had to pick a sport to focus on, and that you picked swimming. And then you said it was, it's kind of a heads down. You're very like, it's just you in the water. And I was reflecting on what you were saying about being a quiet kid. And I was like, oh, it makes sense that you maybe I have this wrong, but my thought process is, yeah, it makes sense that you would have picked a contemplative sport as something to focus on, having been a contemplative, observant kid.
Yeah, I'd never sat back and thought of it like that. Like, if I played basketball, it's, good chance I might have been like the captain of our basketball team in high school. But swimming was, let's say, basketball, I can only grow so tall. I'm 6'2", but I'm never going to be like 7 feet tall. It just wasn't, no matter what I did, I knew no matter how much effort I put in, there was going to be a ceiling on it. And I think at the time I made the decision, I was probably maybe top 100 basketball in Ontario, but I was, I think, first for my age group in swimming. Now that wasn't the decision, but it was like, oh, let's see where this takes us. And I enjoyed that challenge of it, but it's also nice to have people around you all going through the same thing. Like, it's very rare. I'm like this with my business partner too, but it's very rare to have people in the same room pushing towards the same goal at the same time. You all have a different path to get there, but you all know what that is, what that end goal is. And it's motivating and it's demoralizing and it's challenging, but it's also in the end like rewarding.
Yeah. And it's what brought you to Vancouver.
It's what brought me to Vancouver. What's given me a ton of friends, education, traveled the world. It's definitely given a lot to me.
Yeah. But you also mentioned there was a point where you were like, yeah, this is not perhaps the eventual life path that I want to keep going
yeah.
down.
That came up probably twice in my career. Once when I was 16, and you're seeing some of your friends quit because they want to go party and hang out on weekends and do things, right? And sometimes you're in ruts and you're just not performing well. And 16 was probably one of those times. You're also a teenager. You're going through a lot of stuff. And then I think, when I finished university, retired from swimming, part of the reason was I could see what the greats were doing to be great, and I wasn't prepared to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say that, I'm talking about like the Michael Phelps, the Michael Jordans, the Kobe Bryants. And I was not prepared to give up future life for current life, for whatever success was to people at that time.
Mm-hmm. And it was around this time you were in university.
Yep.
And this is when you got into hospitality too, as
Yep.
a way to, support yourself.
Yep.
And it's led you to where you are. So let's take a look at how you got into everything, because you've been at quite a lot of establishments in
Yes.
the
I'm
city. And open them up. You're not old. If you're old, that makes me old.
Yeah. There wasn't a ton of funding from the Canadian government to support amateur athletics, especially pre-2010 Vancouver Olympics. So I had to start working, and you need to find a job that's conducive to being on the pool deck at 4:45 in the morning, going to class, swimming in the afternoon, and then you're done at like 6. The only thing that really works at that time is restaurants, even though it doesn't help you in your end goals of like getting to sleep on time, having proper nutrition, and getting up in the morning to, race the best in the world. So, but I started in restaurants, and I loved it. And I think it surprised a lot of people because I was a very finicky eater. And to work in restaurants, people were like, what? But again, it was another challenge. It was something new, and it was a whole new field. It was like food, ingredients, sauces, wines, cocktails, spirits, beer. And so I really liked it. I really, really liked it.
Mm. Yeah. And I'd love to know. So you started off at Hell's Kitchen. It was really sort of that first major job, and that was behind the bar. So you started off behind the bar.
Yes.
And then sort of made your way into different areas. But let's start there and sort of go through some of the establishments you were at. And then I do have some questions in and around, roles within the industry.
I started at a place called Up and Down just as a barback. And it wasn't the best spot. It was always pretty quiet. There were some good nights, but pretty quiet. So as we knew that restaurant was closing, my friends were like, just get behind the bar. We'll train you as a bartender so you can say you're a bartender. So I did like 2 weeks, I think, behind the bar, and then got hired at Hell's Kitchen. And at the time, Hell's Kitchen had built a second bar, so I was kind of like the B bartender, like working the small bar, and still very quiet. And so the manager at the time, who's also a very well-established restaurateur in the city now, pulled me aside and he's like, look, if you're not going to talk to your guests, I have to fire you. I was like, yeah. So I took it upon myself to try to start putting myself out there. And so I learned a bit. It wasn't like a great cocktail bar. It didn't have incredible food, but it was a nice like neighborhood restaurant. Friends, all the swimmers, everyone would just kind of hang out there. So it was a nice spot. And then from there, I wasn't I was just ready to move on. It kind of comes time. And I worked at one or two other bars and then had an opportunity to work at Feenie's, which at the time was in its heyday. So I remember I studied the whole wine list, studied everything on that food menu, like everything, all the ingredients. I paired everything. I learned their cocktail list. And I walked in, and a previous guest of yours, Paul Grunberg, was the manager. And he was like, oh, you're Jordy's buddy? And I was like, yeah. He's like, great. See you tonight at 6. And that was my whole interview. He denies it, but that was my whole interview. And I was like, wait, I learned all this stuff. I'm like, I wanted to show what I got. But it got me in the door of something that was above my weight class. Like I was probably not ready for that level of service. So another challenge, learned it really quick. Met my business partner there now. He was new on the line in the kitchen. I was, behind the bar. We both got the opportunity to move over to Lumiere at the time, which was Canada's top restaurant. And again, another thing just way above my weight class, like ultra fine dining service, wines I couldn't even say, let alone understand. And so that was another challenge. And from there, I got an opportunity. You never know what's coming to you in disguise. I got an opportunity for a really bad restaurant to be a bar manager. Took the reins, studied everything I could, learned what I could, had a good mentor help me out, and we opened this restaurant. And it should have been great, but it was just operated very poorly. So once they owed me a lot of money and checks were bouncing, I literally walked out the door down the street, and I was fortunate to walk into what was going to be Boneta. And Boneta was some guys who used to work at Feenie's Lumiere. So I kind of got to be one of the bar managers there. And I think Boneta really changed or helped elevate Vancouver dining to another level. It was Boneta and Chambar were kind of like ultra casual or casual, but really refined, cool spots. So Boneta was an excellent learning experience. It was nice to be able to have a lot of say in what was going on. Learned a ton, worked with some great people, and learned a ton about what not to do in terms of ownership. Like, you know, a lot of restaurants aren't around for reasons, but every time I've seen these things not work out, it's like, I'll take a lesson from it. And I think the biggest lesson is don't panic. But I was, after that, again, Paul Grunberg was newly hired at the Market in Shangrila Hotel. And I got hired as the bar manager there. And that's working for one of the world's best chefs. So also that's where I met my future wife.
Oh, that's right.
And yeah, so that was pretty cool too.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And then that took you to Chambar eventually.
To Chambar. I was the GM of Chambar for about 5.5 years, the old Chambar and the new one. And about halfway through my time at the old one, I was starting, Juke was percolating. Juke was coming to be.
Yeah. And how was it starting? Like, where did the idea come from?
The idea came from my wife and I. So being a bit of a searcher on things and like a reader, I'd always try to figure out, I knew restaurants were short money. Like if you're working the bar, you're going to get tips, but you're not going to be an 80-year-old bartender. Like you need to have something else that you're good at. So again, every step I moved or every place I moved to, I was learning more and more and more and accumulating more information and knowledge. And so I was like, I think I'm going to do a restaurant, but I want to talk to some people. So I sat down with some friends, some swimmers, friends of friends, people that were generous enough to donate their time to me in all different industries, just to see if it was something I was interested in. So I think I met about 10, 12 people, you know, all at different parts of their career at different times, and none of them really interested me. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. Like I'm going to do a restaurant that is more like a lounge, because being in Toronto, you can actually go to lounges that aren't clubs and not restaurants. And you can't do that out here with our liquor licensing. So I was like, let's create something like that has that feel. Being a finicky eater, let's do something that's approachable to people, which happened to be fried chicken and ribs. I'm like, but how do we do it the best it can be? Like, how can it be the best quality ingredients at an affordable price? And my wife was like, you're only doing this with Brian. It's the only person that you'll do this with. It's the only one that'll work. Your partnership will be good. So I approached him, and at the time he was making his decision between a few other places, and he said yes. And Juke 1,000,000% would not be where it would be without him. He's the chef, but he's also complete yin to my yang. And so that's what we were doing, but we couldn't figure out how to make a cocktail bar work with a takeout counter. And I just happened to be traveling. My wife and I were in London. We went into an Indian restaurant, and downstairs of the Indian restaurant was authentic Indian, like what you think one would be. But upstairs was like all vibrant colors and like street food, and just like it doesn't look at all like Juke. But just the fact that these people could do it unlocked something in my mind, as to be like, oh, Juke can work. But then everyone thought we were crazy, because you're giving up half your restaurant for a takeout counter, when at the time seat counts are king. Like everyone's like, you need 70 seats plus to be profitable. You need this, you need that. And we're like, we're going to give up our seats and we're going to get that green box in like everybody's house. And that's how we're going to start doing this. It's a contact sport. How many people can we contact to create our business?
Wow. Okay. And now, how many years later? Is it like 5?
We are just past our 6th anniversary.
What?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Congratulations.
Yeah. Thanks.
It worked.
Most of the time. It's going well. It worked. We've had some other businesses that, I don't like to see things as failure. I see them as lessons that haven't necessarily worked out. But, every once in a while, opening a restaurant isn't easy. And if things are going well, everyone's like, oh, you guys are doing great. But I have a picture saved on my phone of our bank account on the day we opened, and it was at 89 cents. No, 11 cents. Sorry. So I was like, stay humble, basically. We could be back at 11 cents any day.
Right. So that just keeps you hustling
driven,
and evolving. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know, you've had like 20 plus years in restaurants now, and you've been in a few major roles. And I'd love to know, in your opinion, beyond the typical job description, maybe this is like a feeling, but what does a bartender contribute to the overall feeling of an establishment versus a GM versus an owner? Yeah, like not the job description, but like what's that magic?
I think the bar is probably more important than the GM. And I've done both roles. I'm not knocking anyone's job. But when you're on the bar, you're setting the tone for all your service team because they have to come to the bar, they get their drinks. So you're almost keeping the servers in a good place. You also have a bar that you're taking care of guests. You're setting their tone for their evening, guiding them, crafting their experiences. And so when I left the bar to become a general manager, I really missed crafting a guest's experience. When you're a GM, you're just touching every table, like, hey, how are you? Like, hope everything's good. And you're just kind of like, it's a bit more superficial because it's quicker and you have more tables to be in touch with. And so you're still setting a tone for the night. You're making sure everyone's happy. But I feel that you can't guide the experience as much as a bartender can. And there are incredible general managers in the city. I was fortunate to work with a lot of them. They set the tones for your staff. They keep people happy. I just feel the bar, you're also serving spirits. Like your job is to serve something that people want to maybe make them happy at the time. Yeah.
And what do you think makes an exceptional establishment?
Oh, there's a lot. There's a lot that goes into that. I think authenticity is one. It's probably the most important. Like if you look at, some of the best restaurants in the city, best is subjective, I get it. But, maybe you look at the Bao Bays, the Comos, the Savia Volpes, like those are all extensions of the people who own them and built them. They're not just opened with a lot of money in a corporation and people that want to open a restaurant. These are people who grew up in the industry, that know what they want, that are passionate about the food they're serving. So I feel that's a big one. Authenticity and passion, like those are the two big things. And then execution falls right after that.
Yeah. Because there's some places that you walk into and everything is just clicking, and you know it. Like there's this flow between the kitchen to the floor to the food to the music, and you just know like this is top notch. And
you can feel when it's not there.
Yeah, totally. When when people like care about what they're doing and when they're not. I'd love to know, what are the things that you've learned as a competitive athlete that you currently apply into your world now?
Yeah. Definitely time management. That's a big one. When you're, swimming 6 hours a day and you're in school and you have other responsibilities, I think time management's huge. I think patience is severely underestimated in our society, especially as it's getting more impatient. People want everything now. They want it quicker. They have their phones. And sometimes things don't happen overnight. Like if you're an Olympic athlete, your goal might be 4 years away, might be 8 years away, and you're grinding every day to get that there. So, and along the way, there might be some small pieces of gratification, or there may be like nothing for a long time. So I feel like patience is a big one. And dealing with people every day, like you're dealing with a lot of egos, a lot of emotions, your team can be ever evolving. So being patient, and then being strong enough to be empathetic, but also strong enough to be able to correct when needed. And that's a tough balance at times.
Thank you for that reminder about patience. I was kind of smiling as you were saying that because, 2 years ago, I took a leap of faith and left my corporate job to start some new things, the podcast being one, my sound therapy practice being the other. And you have to put in the time and the effort. You have to be consistent. Yeah. With a podcast is, everyone can expect every Wednesday, unless we're on hiatus, you're going to get an episode.
Yep.
And it's going to be of, hopefully this quality is what I want to put out there. And it takes a long time, and invisible things and invisible hands that happen behind it all to make it seem so smooth and effortless.
But that's the thing, like there's a lot of people, and that's, a lot of people working towards a common goal, right? And some of them are unsung heroes. Some of them are people who get the spotlight a little bit more, but every person's job is important. And as long as they believe in what you're trying to achieve, be it a podcast, be it sound therapy, be it a restaurant, you're probably leading them in the right direction. And, they're on board. Like they believe in the vision ahead.
How do you try to lead?
I try to lead probably from, this is going to sound odd to say, but probably from behind. And the way I say this is I'd rather lift people up, like push people up, than try to be on top and say like, I'm the boss. I hopefully lead by example. Sometimes they're easier than others. Like my business partner, Brian's catching up to me because he just had a kid, but I had a kid and then we had COVID and a kid during COVID. So I almost had 2 babies during COVID, which changed a lot of my role at work. Like I was at work a lot less. And so at that point, you can't always lead by example. So I try to lead by understanding a lot. And I think that goes earlier on, as you're saying, you were quiet, I was quiet, you get to observe things. So if you can observe and really distill down either what you're trying to express, what you're trying to achieve, what the issue is, you can start affecting change faster. So I try to push people forward.
Yeah, that reminds me of an old boss of mine had said that, he tried to be a servant leader, like a leader that serves. And I always thought that was really nice. And I always kind of felt that way when I was managing a team. That's what I hope I was doing, is leading by example, but also, tide lifts all ships type of approach.
And I remember when we went from the old Chambar of 30 to 40 staff to the new Chambar of 150. At some point, one of the staff was quitting their position and she was just like, I'm leaving, I'm going to go do something else. But part of it's because you're not the same. And I realized in that moment, I was like, I can't give that much of myself to 150 people. I can do it when it's 30 staff and we all know each other and we know each other's lives and what's happening, but there wasn't enough of me to give to be able to come home and be whole at the end of the night and be the husband I needed to be for my wife or whatever it was. So when I knew I couldn't give that much, I was like, okay, it's time for me to actually do Juke now. And that was a really striking moment. And I think that goes again, really understanding yourself and your capabilities. And that's what happened. So when I couldn't lead the way I wanted to lead, it was time to change.
And so then how do you manage your energy now?
It's a bit different now. I've set myself in a pretty good routine. My kids are, 3 and 4 and we're close to. And, I wake up, I set them up for breakfast, take them off to school, go to my workout, and then head into work. And, with kids, it changes a lot, puts a lot in perspective, but it also eats a lot of your time, eats a lot of your energy. So they keep me young, they keep me invigorated, but they also can be exhausting. so I'm more protective of saying no to things. And I think as a business owner, the good thing I have now is I can work on my schedule. So anyone who knows me at work, and probably to a bit of a detriment, is like, I'll work 7 days a week, but I might not be on site 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can call me at any point and I'll get stuff done.
Mm. Yeah, it's a good thing to establish some kind of like ritual where, you know, you can move through life with as much ease as possible. Yeah. Well, I'm just mindful of the time, so I only have a few more questions for you. This is kind of a fun one, but do you have a favorite lyric that you ever wrote or a rhyme that you felt made you feel powerful when you performed it?
Oh, wow. Not mine. A Jay-Z lyric is, I'm trying to live it to the limit and love it a lot. And that one always gets me. One of mine, oh man, I don't know yet. I don't know. I wasn't ready to go back in the Rolodex and pull up some old ones.
That's all good if you can't think of one. I was just so curious, having seen you write so many and witnessing that. I wonder if there was one that stuck out for you.
Nothing this second, but I'm sure there is. But I'll like I freestyle with my kids every day, and keeps me sharp, keeps them sharp and fun. But yeah.
What do you want your kids to know about you?
I hope they know that I love them, and there's been a lot going around the past few years of like how men don't express emotions and all these things. But I think with my kids, with my friends, I don't take a moment not to say I love you to anyone that I care about. It's short. It may not come around again. So take those times. So I hope my kids know I love them and that I'll do anything for them.
I have a question about all of the guys that you were on your swim team, because, you know, some of them I met way back in the day, the Svetos, the Sams, and I'm probably, you know, missing Josh's and
Josh and Jake.
Lots of names that are, you know, coming back very rapidly right now. But what would you like them to know about that time you spent together?
I was grateful.
Swimming.
I was grateful for it. We meet up at least once a year, but we go away for a weekend every year. And last year, there was a big conversation about how not everyone got out unscathed from high performance athletics. Some people had different issues in their personal lives. And it hit me that I was swimming for the opposite reason that they were swimming. I was almost swimming as that was my escape, not my to-do. And for them, it was like their to-do, and because they had to do it, they needed to find other releases after. And so it hit me that I kind of got out not scot-free, but differently than some of them. So I am incredibly grateful for the time we've spent together, the times we still spend together. But, you know, like Sveto always calls me like little brother because he met me when I was 16, right? There's moments that like stick out in your mind of like selflessness. Like you might be in a really hard practice, and I just remember one practice I wasn't doing well, and someone reached into the lane and just like tapped my leg and was like, let's go. And that's like 2 seconds out of someone's day, but that like changed my life. That was like, don't give up on yourself, you know, support the people around you. There's so much in that little interaction. So I'm grateful for those times.
My last question that I ask everyone, with what you do, what is it that you want to leave behind in the world?
I hope you just leave the world in a better place. I know that someone asked me a while ago, like, what do you want your reputation to be or something? And I've always said, my reputation isn't mine. It's what the people go on to do that have worked with me. So I hope I can, you know, that's a tough one. That's a layered question, but I hope we as a community, as a company, as a family, can leave the world in a better place than we got it.
This has never happened before, but I actually have another question after the final question.
Sure.
And it is about adoption. And I'm curious to know that, is it possible when you're adopted to feel whole, or is is there always something that may feel unanswered? Like, what would you say to people who are adopted and maybe thinking about this question?
I think you can feel whole without having all your questions answered. That's one. No one knows the meaning of life, so you're not going to be able to answer every question, right? But I think is the first thing I would say to people who are adopted is embrace it, because it's unique. It's a different life path than you would have had. So, you actually have two ways you could have gone. And if you want to find out about people, there's places you can go to. Like if you want to find out about your birth family, there's websites you can check up on. There's laws you can research and figure that out. And I would always just say, be cautious, right? And be conscious. In my mind, I never allowed myself to build it up in my head, because you never know what you're going to get. And for some reason, my wife knows this. I knew as a kid that if I got to meet my birth father's side, he'd already be gone. I don't know why I knew that. I just knew it. And he was. And, it's sad I didn't get to meet him, but I've got this excellent relationship with these two sisters and their mom. And, it's just, be conscious and be cautious.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed reconnecting with you.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad that you've re-entered my life. I hope we have more conversations like this.
I hope so.
In the future. And what a beautiful life you've built.
Thank you for doing this. Still building.
As always, thank you for being here and for listening. To learn more about today's guest, visit the episode page for show notes and links on wearethecraft.com. You can find the entire podcast archive here or explore more conversations with past guests on Spotify and Apple. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button on these platforms, including YouTube, to get notified when new episodes drop. Any likes and shares on social media are deeply appreciated too. Sound and audio engineering for the show are by Andrew and Jaba Gaspis. All guest portraits and images are by Juno Kim. Appreciate you all and see you again soon.